have to tell you, I've been super excited about this project. It's a jewelry box that I found at the thrift store quite a while back. I'm going to show you how I am going to upcycle it into a functional yet whimsical piece. Hey, Donna here. Welcome to my channel. This jewelry box has definitely seen some better days. The hardware is corroded, there's the ugly old pink velveting, and even the faux stained glass is chipping away. So we are going to fix it up. I'm going to start off by removing all the hardware. So dig out those screwdrivers, and don't forget you're also going to need to keep these in a nice tray so you don't lose all those little pieces. Now, one thing I did learn along the way is that a magnetized screwdriver would definitely have beneficial because these screws are so little. I'm just removing the hinges off of the door now. I want to remove all the hardware so I can properly prep this piece so I can create a beautiful textured finish on here. So just remember, you want to set that aside. So inside here, you can see that there is a rotating necklace holder. I struggled with this a bit and I discovered that there was a bracket on the inside of this little piece here, and I needed to use some needle nose pliers to squeeze it together to release the turning bit. I'll show you right here. You can see how I had to pinch that together, and that allowed me to remove the hook, the necklace holder. Now I'm able to access those screws to remove the rest of the necklace holder mechanism. I won't be reusing those pieces, so you can save them for a future project, or you can just throw those away. Now here I am removing the magnet as well. The one screw is again kind of difficult to get at, but I did manage. Next, we're going to remove all the hardware off of the door, and we will be reusing these pieces, so you will definitely need to set those aside in your tray. So the handle on this door was another piece that I struggled with, so I ended up using just some pliers, or here's some wire cutters, to pull on it and then twist, pull again, and continue to twist until it released. You could see that it was quite a hefty screw, so I put that aside as I'm going to reuse that as well. Now I'm going to start to remove all that icky pink rose felt. I don't even know what this material is. I used a painter's palette to lift it away. It's a nice sturdy blade, but it's able to get into tight spaces. And as you can see, I'm also using a hair dryer. The hair dryer helps to release some of the adhesive. Here I'm using my tool to scrape away some of those paper bits and the adhesive. Some spots were really tough to work on, but I just continued to use my heat gun and my painter's palette until all of the glue had released. Here at the bottom, it released actually really well. And as I was working on this, I discovered that part of this paper and pink fabric was actually tucked underneath the mirror that you see. So I gently tugged on it. I didn't want to break that mirror. And then that released and pulled right out. So I realized at this point I should have maybe waited to remove the drawer pulls, but I managed to get those little drawers out because we need to remove all of that pink fabric cardboard out of the inside of these drawers as well. So I'm just using the same technique as I did where the mirror was and the little cupboard, just using my heat gun and my painter's palette, and it came away quite easily. So this drawer here would be where you'd store your rings. I was actually quite impressed with how well the glue was holding up. I was able to work away at it and pull them up, and they popped out really nicely. All right, so now we need to clean up the inside of our little drawers. I'm using some rubbing alcohol on a rag, and that soaked into the paper really well. And I'm using my painter's palette to scrape away all the excess paper. Now, I preferred this method, but I did realize after working away on it, it didn't remove the adhesive. So that part was left behind, but I used a sanding block to get in there, and that helped to smooth the surface down. You don't need to remove all the little bits, but you do want to make the surface smooth. Your other option is to use water. I have seen others use water, and I found that I didn't like this quite as much because the water ended up soaking into my wood, and it also didn't soak up into the cardboard paper as quickly as the rubbing alcohol did. I did manage to try this version out, and like I said, it did remove both the paper and the adhesive, which worked great. I did use a rag to soak up all the extra water. So you have two options on how to remove all that. All right, so here I am now sanding down the surface. There was a lot of grime on the surfaces of these little drawers and the jewelry box as a whole. I also needed to sand it down because the paint finish or the varnish was really, really shiny. So I needed to prep the surface for painting. So I'm going to do the same prep for the door, again, sanding it down. The surface was so shiny, and I knew that the paint would not adhere to this. Another option would be to use some paint stripper, but I find that using the sanding block works just fine for my purpose. So as you could see, there was quite a bit of I don't even know what it was. It was some weird substance on the surface of this, and the sandpaper scraped that away really nicely. So I'm just going to continue to work on my surface and removing the excess dust with a rag until my surface is all scuffed up and ready to paint. I'm going to work on the glass panel now as well. Again, I'm going to use some rubbing alcohol. Now, I have no idea if it was already loosened up or if the rubbing alcohol loosened this. As I was gently scraping away with my painter's palette knife, the faux glass, stained glass, just popped right off. I was actually really impressed. So again, I don't know if that was the rubbing alcohol or not, because some of the pieces had already fallen off, but it did help to loosen up the rest of it, and it also helped to clean the glass really well, because there was that weird, I don't even know what the substance was on here, but it was all over the glass as well, and the rubbing alcohol and the rag cleaned it off really nicely. I'm going to give everything a coat of gesso. Gesso is a primer that artists use on canvases, but I find that it actually works really well on wood pieces, plastic pieces, anything that is dark or shiny. I find that gesso works really, really well as a primer. So I had this container. It's a really nice smooth consistency, and I picked it up at a local store called Dollarama. I'm applying it one coat to all of the jewelry box pieces, and I'm going to allow it to dry really well. The reason why I'm doing that is because I had fiddled around before and I discovered that this stain, varnish, whatever was used on this piece bled through the paint. This gesso seals that all up and also provides a nice smooth surface for the paint to adhere to. You will also use less paint if you prime your pieces. Yes, it is a lot of work, but it's definitely going to be worth it in the end. So I'm just going to cover the entire piece with my gesso, except for those spots where I know I won't be painting. I had this bottle of a leaf green paint sitting around for a while, and I've been wanting to use it up. So I'm going to mix that along with some cream paint to create a really pretty, nice, lighter green color. I'm loving this color right now. I think it's just beautiful. And I am going to apply this paint all over the surfaces of our jewelry box. I will be applying a total of 2 coats. You can see how well the paint is going on to the surface of the gesso. It's just such a beautiful finish. So I am going to be doing something different on the inside of the boxes, so you'll want to just keep watching to see what I do. In the meantime, I'm going to continue to paint all those surfaces of our jewelry box. I am even going to go onto the inside of the drawer portion. You don't have to do that, that's entirely up to you, but I just wanted some cohesion there. So once you have one coat, you'll want everything to dry really well before you add your second coat. There was a few spots where I didn't allow my pieces to dry well and the paint ended up lifting. So right here, this is my second coat of paint. Don't worry about those little holes. We'll be dealing with those here in a bit, but you want to let that all dry really well, your second coat. And then if you need to apply a third coat, go ahead, but I actually found that I didn't need to with having that primer base. So here now I'm just clearing those little holes for our drawer pull, and I'm also distressing the surface. I'm using my sanding block, and what that'll do is bring out all the different layers that are underneath. It's a really cool effect. And again, with having that gesso, it helps the paint to adhere so you're not lifting all of it up. To really help the distressing pop, I like to apply a coat of varnish. You can think of it as being similar to wax if you're doing a chalk finish. That would be really cool as well. But this is what I do when I am just using some craft paint. And you can see the difference here. It's really effective. So I'm going to go over again all of my pieces with a coat of varnish. And I'm also going to be distressing all of my pieces. For the main jewelry piece here, I did end up having to go in with a finer grit. I'm telling you, that gesso really helped to hold the paint down into place. So here I'm using the sanding block, and that lifts and shows a bit of the white that was underneath as well. I'm going to continue to work away using a rag to remove any of the dust, and then you can go ahead and apply a coat of varnish on this piece as well. The brand of varnish that I actually love to use is the Matte Finish by CreArtive. I just really like the consistency. It's nice and thin and leaves a bit more of a matte finish. It's not super high gloss. I just think it's just so beautiful. So I did give everything a coat. I allowed it to dry overnight because it was kind of tacky once it was dry. So do keep that in mind. So it's the next day. I decided to distress it some more by using some archival ink in potting soil and leaf green. I like to apply my archival inks using some makeup sponges. Now, you don't have to do this step, but I find that it really adds some interest to your piece, as if it has been touched by dirty little fingers over the years and the dirt kind of collects on all these little spots. So I'm just going to add the two colors here and there. You can kind of see the difference there. And I'm placing some more of the ink in around where the drawer pulls would be. I'm also applying some to the main piece, and I'm concentrating on corners, again, kind of where you would typically see dirt marks on furniture pieces from over the years of use. All right, I'm digging out the power tools. I needed to drill a hole in the bottom of this piece because I am going to be using some fairy lights in this, and I needed a place to hide the battery pack. I'll be showing you that here in a minute. In the meantime, I wanted to cover up the mirror, but yet still have the brightness that it can give. So I found this window covering from Dollar Tree, and it's got a beautiful floral and leaf pattern on it. I thought it would be perfect for this piece. My little cubby here measures 3 1/4 by about 8 3/4. So I cut a piece of this glass covering down to size, and what's nice about this is that it has some lines on it already, so it made measuring out the piece really easy. I'm just going to be using my scissors to cut this out, but you could use a ruler and a utility knife if you choose. All right, so now I'm going to be using my archival inks again. I didn't want that stark kind of white look, so I'm going over it with the inks. I'm just kind of creating a blotchy look. I felt like that will, again, just kind of help to break up all that stark white and will give a really interesting look in the background on that mirror. You could go ahead and cover the background with some scrapbook paper if you choose, but I wanted to try something a little different, and I'm loving the way that had turned out. So I allowed the ink to set. Before I apply it though to my mirror, I needed to clean my mirror with a rag and some rubbing alcohol. That'll just remove any fingerprints that may be on there and some oils. Now I have to say, this window covering was so easy to apply. I just lifted a little bit up and stuck it onto the back. And then I used a plastic card to smooth it out to get any air bubbles out. But I actually found that I didn't have many struggles. And the beauty too is I had tested it and it pulls up really easily as well. So if you decide that you don't want this look, it's really easy to remove. So I'm just slowly removing the backing and pressing it down with my little plastic card until I've got the piece set in place. And I think that looks really cool. For the inside of our cubby, I am going to be lining it with this beautiful sheet moss. I only had a little bit of this left, and it's kind of on a webbing, and there's like a stickiness to the back as well. I'm measuring the inside of our little cubby. I needed to add some to the wall as well as to the floor and the ceiling of that little cubby. So I'm just cutting it down to size. I started off with the length, and again, it was about 8 3/4 inch tall. And I decided that what I would do is just cut this particular piece in half, and then that will go on one side of the wall and the other piece will go on the other side. Now, as you could see, my piece didn't fully fit in there, so I did need to go in and apply a bit more green paint. While that green paint is drying, I'm going to attach the battery pack for the lights. I'm attaching it with some hot glue to the underside. Make sure the battery pack door is available so you can change out those batteries when needed. I'm just going to see that my hole is big enough to fit the lights through, and it is. It's awesome. I'm using some hot glue to seal or just glue down the extra wiring. You could use some tape or anything else that you have and allow the glue to set. You can just set those lights aside for now. We're going to come back to those in a bit. I'm going to use my Aleene's tacky glue to adhere the moss sheets, and I'm spreading it out with just a plastic card. These are great to spread out glue and other textures or other mediums like that. I'm pressing the moss down into place, the sticky side down, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and as well as the floor of our little cubby and the ceiling. So I decided to cut a piece that would fit the floor as best I could, and then that extra little piece that you see, I'm gonna stick that onto the ceiling towards the back where I don't have any paint. I do have some extra moss that I will be using to fill in any spots that don't have any moss. So I'm gonna start to weed my lights through the hole, and I forgot about my sheet moss, so I did end up lifting it, but thankfully it was a mesh and the wire poked through the mesh and I was able to feed the wire through. and I just stuck the moss back down into place. Now this strand of lights does have 16 mini LED. I would have preferred 20, but 16 was all I had on hand. I dove into my stash of some scrapbook paper. I have this Tim Holtz Ideology scrapbook paper, and I really liked these green. The texture on it was just so cool and rustic. I thought this would be perfect to create some drawer liners. I'm just using those pink pieces that we had removed out of the inside of the drawers as my templates. I cut this one piece down to size. That will be the bottom of our drawer. It is measuring 3 by 3. And then this particular, the side panels for the drawer is 1 3/4 by 3 inches. So I'm going to cut all my paper down to size, and I will need 1 bottom per drawer and a total of 4 side panels per drawer. If you make a mistake like I did here, just feel free to trim it down to size or cut some new pieces out as needed. So before I move on, I just want to make sure that I do have all the right sizes. So I am just going to place these little scraps inside before I glue them all into place. My drawers are all ready to go. And just to make things a little easier for myself, I set out some piles per drawer. So I've got 1 bottom piece and 4 of the side panels, and I split those up into 4 separate groups just so I wouldn't get mixed up. Again, I'm going to be using my tacky glue and my plastic card to smooth out the glue, and then I'm going to press the paper into place. I will also be using another plastic card to smooth the paper down into place and just to remove any of the bubbles. Just be careful not to use too much glue because it will ooze out quite a bit on the sides, and I didn't want that glue to get all over my paper. It will leave a bit of a, I don't know, like a matte. It will just take away from the texture of this paper. So I'm just going to continue to work on the drawers until I get all the paper put into place, and then you want this all to dry really well. While the glue is setting on all our other pieces, I'm going to work on some figurines. I got the owl and rabbit from Dollar Tree, the angel from Dollarama, and these little mushrooms, I got those from my local dollar store. I'm using warm white and a golden yellow as well as a metallic gold for all these pieces. I'm applying 2 coats of my warm white onto the angel. Now you may be wondering why I'm doing that when she's already really beautiful. Well, as I was kind of looking, doing my research on how I wanted to create this piece, I realized the little cubby I was creating was actually going to be kind of dark, and I wanted her to really stand out. So I needed to paint her a lighter color. The same thing with the owl and the rabbit. Now the owl and the rabbit, I do just a bit of dry brushing just to help to differentiate the features that are on these little figurines. Of course, feel free to paint these any way you'd like or leave them as is. For the mushrooms, I have played around with these before, and I discovered that if you don't seal them up with a primer, the color from the mushrooms is going to bleed through. So I'm going to give each of these a coat of gesso. I found again that the gesso works best for me. And I did 3 of the large mushrooms and 3 of the little tiny mushrooms, set them aside and allow them to dry really well. Once dry, paint them with the color of your choice. I'm going with this golden yellow color. I wanted to kind of keep things neutral, but if you really want a nice pop of color, then of course paint these any way you'd like. My angel's first coat of paint is all dry. Now I'm going to go over it with my second coat of craft paint, and there was still kind of a bit of a mottled look to it, but that is okay. If I wanted it to be a solid color, I would have definitely gone over it with some gesso first. My second coat of paint is all nice and dry, so now I'm going to go over it with my matte varnish, the DecoArt matte varnish, and then I will allow that to dry really well. I needed to apply the varnish for the next step that I am going to do on this angel. And craft paint is very porous and it will end up absorbing anything else that you put over top. So I needed to seal that. Here I'm adding some little dots to the mushroom. Now I did end up doing another step to this and it ended up covering up all my little dots, so I had to reapply them. But here's what those look like before I apply this gold metallic paint. You can see how it ended up covering up those little dots. So I did end up having to go back over those little dots. I went with the gold paint and put it on and then kind of rubbed some of it off, as I wanted a bit of a sheen to be glowing off of these little mushrooms. And you'll see that effect here in a little bit. So I'm going to set those all aside to dry. Next, I'm going to be using some DecoArt walnut gel stain and a stiff bristle brush. I'm going to remove the excess using a rag, and what I did was I kind of stippled it into all the little nooks and crannies on this piece. You'll see how her features end up really popping, but you can see how it just kind of provides like a really old world look, but yet still have a nice light shade of color. So then when she's standing up against a dark background, she's still going to really pop. I'm going to set her aside and let her dry. All right, we're going to go back to our little cubby. I have got these branches that I had foraged along with my little mini lights. I'm going to start to attach my mini lights using some hot glue to the background. And you can see how the light is still glowing really nicely against that background that we had created. You're going to find that as we work on this piece, layers is key. So you're going to see how I'm starting at the back and then I'm going to slowly work forward to build those layers, and those layers are going to create some depth to our piece. It is going to be so cool. Just wait. So now I'm going to add my branches. I've got my pruning shears and I'm just going to trim my pieces down to size so they can fit inside the little cubby. I'm going to treat this kind of like a little book nook. Book nooks are really, really cool. If you haven't seen those, then definitely look it up online. It is so cool. And this is definitely a similar look. So I'm going to apply my branches using some hot glue. I'm going to start off again working at the back and working my way forward with all my different pieces. And I'm going to just use some hot glue for all of it. I want some more branches. I'm just tucking them into the corner. That will hide any sharp seams that you see and create more of a natural look. I'm also making sure that some of my branches have some limbs to make it look like actual trees. All right, I've got this beautiful preserved reindeer moss. I love using reindeer moss. I find it's the easiest moss to work with. I'm using some hot glue to apply it, as well as using the end of a paintbrush to push it into all those tight little spots. This will again help to create a really nice whimsical woodland look. So I'm just going to continue to work with the moss, continue to work with the branches and lights till I build up some interest inside our little cubby or little faux book nook. So we've built up some beautiful texture in the background. Now I'm going to start to bring my scene forward. I have got this larger branch. I'm going to again cut it down to size. I want to use this branch to perch our cute little owl on. So I figured that that one limb would be the perfect place for him to sit. So I'm going to use a bit more glue on this piece And as you can see, I'm only going to put it halfway into our little cubby. Another important thing I forgot to mention was that you want to hold your pieces into place until the glue sets, because you don't want these pieces to fall off. I'm going to continue to add some moss, and I'm adding that to the ceiling. Now, I accidentally covered up my screw holes in the ceiling part, but I do end up exposing those later on, and you'll see why in a bit. So just continue to work on adding some texture, adding some more branches to make it look like a faux forest. And the beauty about adding some of those limbs as well is that you can actually add a branch in the middle, like I'm going to right now, and then you've got a base for it to be glued to right in the middle of the piece, like I'm doing right there. It's really neat. So I decided that I felt like the background just needed a bit more texture, so I'm going and adding a little bit of hot glue and pressing some of the moss into place there as well. I'm going to add our cute little owl. I keep wanting to call him oil. Owl. I'm going to add the little owl. I just figured out the points where it was going to sit on the branch, and that is where I added the glue. Going in and adding some extra glue, and then I'm going to cover up those spots with some moss. Okay, so now it's time to work on the floor of our little cubby. I'm going to add the mushrooms. I'm just curling up the wire on one of these just so it's a little bit higher up off the floor to create some height at the back there. Adding some hot glue. And then I'm going to go ahead and continue to add our little mushrooms and our other figurines. So it's time to add our sweet little angel. I feel like she needs a name, so give me some suggestions down below. And if I choose your name, I'm going to pin you in the comments section because I just think she's so sweet, but I'm not sure what to call her. Along with the little bunny and the owl as well, or as I call him, Oil. Okay, so we're going to just continue with all the little elements. I needed to camouflage the base of the angel, so I added a bit more moss around her feet there. You'll also want to continue to weave the rest of the lights in around the front and part way through, using some hot glue where needed to help hold the lights into place. So we're going to put the glass back in place on our door. Now, I did discover that with mine, there was a bit of paint buildup in the corners, so the glass didn't fit back in properly, so I just used a tool to scrape it out, and then the glass fit in there just fine. I did use a rag to smooth it out so I didn't cut myself. I'm now using the brackets that were on there before to help hold the glass back in place. I have seen some people use some hot glue or some other adhesive. Feel free to use that if you'd like. I didn't want the glue to show through the glass on the backside, so I just went ahead and used those brackets again. I'm also adding the hinges back into place as well, so we can put those into place on the main piece. I'm also going to be reusing the door handle too, which I'll show here in a minute. I used a bamboo skewer to just clean out the holes, the screw holes, so it was easier for me to put those little screws back into place. Here's the handle. There was some weird stickiness on the back, so I just used a tool to scrape that off. And let me tell you, it was so much easier putting this back in than it was for me to pull it out. So I just put that in, and I really like the way that looks. Feel free to change up any of the hardware the way you'd like. I really like the patina on all of these. They were really rustic and rugged, so I stuck with all the hardware that came with this. Here you can see I'm adding the drawer pulls back into place. Again, that patina is perfect for this rustic look that I've gone with. Putting the drawers into place as well. Went back in really smoothly after I let it dry really well. I'm also adding the magnets back into place. So I wanted to put the magnets back because as I was fiddling around with this, the door wasn't staying closed on its own. So this was a definite must for me. So I'm just re-exposing those little screw holes again using my painter's palette. I had to remove some of the moss and some branches, but it was enough. I did struggle with putting this back into place again. One of those magnetized screwdrivers would be amazing for this, but I made do, and I'll show you a little hack that I used to put these back into place here in a moment. So I started off with one side, and I started to try and put this one that was right against the wall back into place, but wasn't working. So I used some hot glue, put my screwdriver into place, and then I was able to get that in just fine. And the glue peeled off as well, so you're not left with that little glob of glue there. I'm using my blow dryer to remove any of the glue strings. And then I added a bit more moss just to help camouflage our magnet a little bit. And then it is ready to be put on display. Don't forget to turn the lights on. Here's the before, grungy, not looking so pretty, and here it is now. Let me tell you, I feel like I am going back to my childhood where my imagination would run wild when I was out in the forest thinking about fairies and little pixies. I think this is just amazing. I am loving it. I have another really cool whimsical project for you to check out right at the end of this video. And I would absolutely love to know what you think of this project. And again, leave me some name suggestions down in the comments below. I want to thank you all so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again. Take care. Bye.